Welcome to Moonnest, where stories drift like stars across the sky. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we'll wander into a gentle tale spun just for sleep. Let your mind slow, your breath soften, and stay with us. The next story is even more magical. Long ago, though not in a time anyone marked, there lived a shepherd, not of sheep, but of clouds. He walked above the world on paths no map could hold, high where the sky turned soft and pale, and the wind moved like a whispering tide. His name had long since drifted away with the breeze, but the birds called him the Gentle One, and the clouds curled close whenever he passed. His sandals were made of woven mist, and his cloak of quiet rain. With each step, the air shimmered beneath his feet, soft and hollow as a lullaby. He carried no crook, only a crooked feather, long, silver, and light as breath, that he used to guide the drifting flocks. The clouds obeyed him not with fear, but fondness. He knew their moods, the pouting storm puffs who rumbled with sleepy protest, the bashful wisps that dissolved when looked at, the grand, slow sailboats of white that moved like thoughts across the dome of the world. Each day, he shaped their wandering, sending shade where it was needed, calling dew down to thirsty leaves, gathering rain to rest in gentle pools. Below him, the earth turned on, unaware of the shepherd above. Villages dreamed in sun or slumbered in soft fog, never knowing who carried the weather like a cradle in his arms. He never asked for thanks. It was simply his way, his quiet tending of a world that never looked up. But one morning, as dawn stretched her golden arms across the horizon, something changed. A cloud that had never strayed, his favorite, small and pink as a peach blossom, was missing. He paused. The sky felt thinner, somehow. The wind whispered a strange tune. And far to the east, where he rarely wandered, a shimmer flickered on the edge of the blue. And so, with a hush in his heart and his feather held close, the cloud shepherd turned his gaze toward that distant glimmer. And he began to walk. He walked where few had ever wandered, along the high, thin ridges of air where the stars once whispered to the moon. The morning light deepened to a gentle blue, and the clouds moved more slowly, watching him with curious hush. Birds flew lower here, their songs distant, as though softened by velvet gloves. The shimmer on the horizon grew brighter, yet stayed far, always far. It glowed like sunlight caught in glass, warm, not dazzling, strange, not frightening. The shepherd's feet left no print, only a hush, and the wind followed him like a dog unsure of what it had smelled. As he walked, other clouds drifted near, concerned perhaps, or simply wondering. He touched them gently as he passed, smoothing one that had curled in confusion, straightening another who had become tangled in her own shape. They moved aside for him, and then returned to their courses, slow and content. Yet still, his mind circled around the missing cloud, the little one, soft and round, the one he called Petal, though no word had ever been spoken aloud. She had followed him for seasons untold, fluttering close when he whistled, hiding behind cumulus cousins when the sky turned gold. Where had she gone? The shimmer pulled him forward. And as he climbed higher, where the world below blurred into mist, he saw a thread, thin as a hair, but glowing like honey. It stretched across the sky, humming faintly, drifting toward the eastern rim of the heavens. It was not made of wind, nor cloud, nor rain. It was something else, something he had never shaped. The shepherd reached out with his feather, and touched it. A note rang through the sky, soft as breath, and then silence fell. But in the silence, a feeling bloomed, familiar, gentle, warm as sunlight resting on a shoulder. The cloud, Petal, was calling him. And so, with his cloak billowing like a memory, the shepherd stepped lightly onto the thread of light. And followed. The thread beneath his feet did not sway, though there was no ground to hold it. It shimmered like morning dew, yet bore his weight as though it had always known him. Every step he took hummed softly, and each hum held a note, and each note stirred a feeling, memories without images, emotions like scents from long ago. Around him, the air was still, thick with hush. Even the clouds below seemed to pause in their drifting. Time slowed its breath. He began to see things in the light. Shapes, faint but flickering, petals falling upward, birds gliding without wings, old echoes of laughter long forgotten. They curled in the corners of his eyes, never staying, always soft. The thread did not lead straight, but wound and curved gently, as if remembering where joy once bloomed, or where sorrow had once passed softly. And then, there was the bell. Not a loud sound, but one so gentle it seemed to bloom inside the chest. A bell of silk, not brass. It rang not to alarm, but to invite. The shepherd stopped. Up ahead, the thread spread wider, and grew into a bridge of golden mist. Beyond it stood something strange, an island in the sky, floating like a dream left behind. It was small, round, and green, lush grass waving in a wind that made no sound. There were flowers, too, with petals that shimmered as though spun from pearl and pollen light. In the center, a tall stone arch rose, open like a window, humming with quiet music. Beneath it, oh, beneath it, there she was. Petal. Small. Round. Glowing gently with a light that was not hers before. She turned slowly as he arrived, as though she had known the moment all along. And then, though no voice passed between them, he felt it. I followed a sound, she seemed to say, not with words, but with warmth. And it led me here. The shepherd stepped onto the floating isle, and the grass bent beneath his feet like soft silk. It was cool, but not cold, like the edge of sleep. Around him, petals floated in slow spirals, turning without falling. Petal drifted close, brushing against his shoulder like a child who wants to be near but says nothing. She had changed, not in shape, but in stillness. She was full of light now, as if she had sipped the sunrise. Together, they looked at the arch. It stood tall, formed of smooth stone the color of moonlight, etched with spirals and loops like river songs. At its top glowed a single pearl, pulsing like a heartbeat. The shepherd stepped forward. As he drew near, the arch shimmered, and then, slowly, gently, opened. Not a door, no. But a memory. A soft one. He saw himself, long ago, when he was not yet a shepherd, but simply a boy who watched the clouds and whispered to the rain. He saw a bird land on his open hand. He saw his first friend, a cloud no bigger than a breath, float beside him and mimic his joy. And then, the memory faded. Petal floated closer, as if drawn by the soft stir of the vision. One by one, more arches appeared around the aisle, some tall, some round, some carved from vines or threads of silver. Each held a memory, not his alone, but the memories of clouds, of skies, of moments that no one on the ground had ever noticed. The shepherd stood still for a long while, listening not with ears, but with his whole self. And he understood, Petal had not been lost. She had been called, by the old heart of the sky itself. Something here was waking. Something gentle. Something old. And very soon, he would be asked to choose. The arches stood in a great circle now, 12 in all, each facing inward, each humming in harmony with the others. Between them, the grass of the floating aisle shimmered with silken ripples, as if it too were listening. Overhead, the sky had darkened into a deep, endless twilight, neither day nor night, just a soft forever between. The shepherd walked slowly among the arches, each step awakening a memory that rose like mist and drifted away. One arch whispered of laughter, laughter carried up on wind from far below, where children chased the tails of shadows and threw petals into the air, never wondering where they might land. Another revealed a quiet mountaintop, where a tired old man once sat with closed eyes, thinking of nothing, feeling the breeze as if it were music. Another showed the moment a drop of rain, small and round as a marble, fell from a leaf into a puddle, and a waiting frog blinked, amused. Each was tiny, quiet, forgotten. But each was full of sky. The shepherd felt his heart swell, not with pride, nor sadness, but with something softer. A belonging. As if the sky had been gently keeping all these things, saving them, and now, offering them back. He looked at Petal. She circled the 12th arch, glowing faintly, still silent. She had not spoken, not once, yet the warmth she gave off was louder than words. Then the center of the circle opened. Not a hole, not a pit, but a pool. Perfectly round. Perfectly still. It reflected no clouds, no stars, only light. And in that light, he saw a question. Not spoken. Not asked. But there, waiting. He knelt beside the pool. The surface was smooth, like polished silver. He gazed into it, expecting to see the sky. But he saw his own eyes, only, not as they were now. Younger. Brighter. Filled with a kind of wonder he hadn't remembered carrying. And then, softly, the pool shimmered, and showed him the cloud he had first shaped. Long ago. Before he had names for things. It had been clumsy, round in the wrong places, thin in others, but it had followed him, joyfully, bouncing in the sky behind him like a kite with no string. It had not been Petal. But it had been the beginning. The pool shifted again. It showed him each step since. Each drifting sky. Each cloud he had soothed. Each shower he had softened. Each ray of sunlight he had bent through mist to make the tiniest rainbow only a dragonfly had seen. No one below had ever known. But the sky had. And now the sky was asking, so gently he barely knew it was a question. Will you stay? The shepherd's fingers trembled over the pool. Petal rested beside him now, pulsing faintly with that same question, as if she too was being asked. Stay in this place, this floating circle of memory and light? Or return to the wandering sky, to drift and tend and shape, unseen and unremembered, once more? There was no pressure. Only silence. Warm, patient, endless. He closed his eyes and waited for the answer to rise, not from thought, but from stillness. He did not speak. Words were too small for the kind of answer the sky required. Instead, he breathed, slowly, fully, and let the quiet move through him like rain through the roots of a tree. Around him, the pool shimmered again, not with images this time, but with feeling, warmth, calm, memory, softness. Petal floated a little closer. She, too, shimmered, not in light alone, but in purpose. She had grown. Not larger in size, but deeper in glow. She no longer drifted like a child, she hovered like a star who knew her place. And the shepherd, he smiled. Just slightly. Not with joy or sadness, but with understanding. He did not need to stay. Nor did he need to go. For the sky was not a place. It was him. It always had been. He touched the pool once more, just his fingertips. And the 12 arches pulsed, one by one, in quiet response. Each sent a soft chime into the air, like a bell made of breath. Then, slowly, like petals closing for sleep, they folded into the earth of the sky isle, vanishing one by one until the land beneath him was still again. The pool remained, but it no longer shimmered. It had done its part. It was resting now. Petals circled around him, then rose, higher and higher, until she was a glowing seed in the twilight dome above. And from her gentle light, 100 more sparks began to form, small, sleepy clouds, each with their own hue, their own shape, their own silent name. The shepherd stood beneath them, and felt the wind return. It was not a loud wind, nothing ever shouted in the sky. It curled around his ankles, lifted the edges of his rain-soft cloak, and whispered across his shoulders like an old friend. It carried the scent of distant pine, the memory of soft snowfall, the hush of wheat bending in golden fields far below. It was the wind that always returned, the one that remembered every place he had walked. He stepped onto it, trusting it fully, and it bore him upward, gently, gently, into the high quiet of the sky. The island of arches faded beneath him, folding itself into the blue as if it had only been a dream, yet he knew it would remain, always, in the soft folds of the world's breath. Above, Petal floated among her kind, no longer alone, no longer following. She had become what she was always meant to be. And the shepherd, he moved once more along the sky paths. The clouds welcomed him without question. They curled beside him. They stretched out with sleepy joy. The sky sighed as he passed. And far below, the world continued to turn, unaware. But softer now, perhaps. As if it, too, had felt a whisper it did not understand, but chose to trust. And the shepherd, with his feather in hand and a new warmth in his chest, walked on. Not to escape. Not to seek. But simply to be. Where the sky needed him most. The silver feather, crooked and fine, had always rested quietly in his hand. It had no magic of its own, no spell or shimmer, but it remembered. It remembered every cloud it had ever guided, every mist it had smoothed, every curl of rain shaped with patience and care. As the shepherd walked now, it pulsed lightly with warmth. Not bright. Not loud. Just a soft thrum, like the beat of a resting heart. He brushed it once across the sky, and the winds bent gently in reply. Not out of command, but recognition. The sky knew him. He passed through a region of stillness, where the clouds turned glassy and faint, and no birds flew. In this high, pale realm, nothing stirred but the feather's trail, a glowing ribbon in the air behind him. And slowly, he realized. The feather was no longer only his. It held the memory of Petal now. Of the arches. Of the island that shimmered like a question and faded like a kiss. It had become a thread between then and now, between sky and sky. He lifted it once more, and this time, a new cloud came. Small. Slow. Gentle. But bright at the core, like a thought made of music. It brushed his side, then drifted beside him. A new one. Not a follower. A companion. And behind it, another. And another. A quiet flock began to gather. They did not jostle. They did not crowd. They simply floated near, slow and patient, like dreams that knew they would be remembered. Each was different, soft blue, pale amber, a green like the underside of a leaf. Some were round, some long, some scattered like whispers. They were young. New. Still forming. But they came willingly, drifting from distant corners of the sky, drawn by a soundless invitation. The shepherd walked slowly, leading not with purpose but with peace. The sky began to change. A soft lavender twilight rolled in, gentler than dusk, lighter than night. And beneath it, stars blinked awake, not overhead, but beside him, around him, between the clouds. The stars were not in the sky. They were the sky. Each twinkle was a memory returned. A kindness remembered. A quiet moment caught in the folds of wind. The shepherd did not speak. But he smiled. Just a little. And the smile was enough to steady the clouds. He led the new flock through the twinkling hush, weaving soft paths through the starlit mist. And somewhere, far below, a child looked up through her window, and saw a new shape in the sky. A shape she had never seen before. A shepherd, walking among the clouds. The sky had become very still now. Not empty, but full of something deeper than sound. A silence like snowfall, like the breath just before sleep. A space where even time stepped softly. The shepherd moved with slow grace, his flock drifting behind like thoughts waiting to be dreamed. Each cloud held its own quiet light now, not bright, not sharp, but gentle, like lanterns made of memory, though no lanterns burned here. Above, the stars pulsed in patterns no chart had ever held. They danced not in circles, but in spirals, in waves, in pulses of hush, soft rhythms that made the heart slow, and the soul still. The feather, now worn smooth by all it had touched, glowed faintly in his hand. He no longer used it to guide. He simply carried it now. The clouds did not need direction. They had become their own calm, their own rhythm, their own breath. And as the shepherd moved through the place between stars, he felt not alone, but held, as if the sky itself now walked beside him. Not above, not below, but with. And that was enough. There came a moment, quiet as a single snowflake falling into still water, when the shepherd turned, not out of longing, nor out of duty, but simply because it was time. The flock followed, not out of need, but trust. Together, they began the long, slow return, not downward, not backward, but inward, folding through the layers of sky that had always known them. The earth far below was quiet. The villages were asleep. The rivers gleamed like ribbons. The mountains breathed slow. And the clouds, those that drifted far above, curled softly into place, just where they were needed. A touch of shade here. A silvered edge there. A whisper of rain over dry hills. Small things. Gentle things. But everything the world never noticed, and always needed. The shepherd moved among them, not as a master, nor even a guide, but as one among many. And in the highest quiet, far above sound or name, the feather he carried at last dissolved into the wind, its memory released, its song complete. The flock was ready. And he was at peace. Above him, the sky pulsed with soft light. Below, the world turned slowly, calmly, as it always had. And somewhere, a dreamer sighed in sleep, wrapped in a sky shaped by kindness. The shepherd walked on. And the stars watched. In a hidden garden where flowers bloom to the rhythm of forgotten memories, an old woman tends time not with hands, but with petals, and one quiet visitor finds their way into the heart of something eternal. In a village so small it was almost a breath between hills, there stood a garden, not marked on maps, not whispered of in the square, and never quite found by those who looked for it. It bloomed behind an old, ivy-covered wall, just beyond a willow that always bent too far, as though listening to the earth. No gate, no sign, just a patch of rust in the stone, and a low hush that tickled the ears like wind through reeds. The garden was tended by an old woman. No one remembered her name. She had been there longer than any of the rooftops, and her back was curved like a comma, always halfway into another thought. Some called her the Clockmaker, though they had never seen a clock in her hand. She walked with a wooden cane made from a branch of her oldest tree, and her eyes were the color of weathered copper. In her garden, things grew, strangely. Time did not pass evenly. Some flowers bloomed only at midnight, lifting moon-white petals that shimmered with dreams. Others opened just as the sun whispered hello, glowing with a golden warmth that made the bees fall quiet in awe. There were vines that coiled upward only when someone remembered something precious. There were mushrooms that glowed whenever someone nearby forgot a sorrow. And in the very center of the garden, there stood a sundial carved from blue stone, its shadow never sharp, never still. It spun slowly, but not with the sun. It turned with memory, and with waiting. No one was invited to the garden. But one summer evening, as the air turned thick with honeysuckle and slow music from a distant flute, someone wandered in. Not by accident. But not quite on purpose, either. The visitor was neither young nor old. A quiet one. A soft walker. Someone who carried silence in their pocket, not heavy, just gently folded. They had come to the village on a whim, or perhaps on a thread of something older. Not searching. Not fleeing. Just walking, the way some people do when the world feels slightly off-center, and the wind smells like questions. They found the willow first. It was bowed low over the lane, its silver-green leaves brushing the traveler's shoulder like a sigh. And behind it, so still it almost wasn't there, the wall. Covered in ivy, dappled with age, and split just slightly where time had left its mark. No gate. But an opening, a sliver, just wide enough to be an invitation. The traveler stepped through. The air inside was different. It didn't move the same way. The breeze stopped humming. The warmth of the sun didn't press, it rested, like a sleepy hand. Everything was slow. Not sluggish. Just unhurried. Flowers stirred, though no wind passed. Their petals shifted as if listening. The traveler paused at the edge of the path, made not of stone, but soft smooth roots and patches of golden moss. Ahead, a low archway of rose vines curved toward the sky. And just beyond it, seated on a bench carved from the stump of a long-fallen tree, was the old woman. She did not look up. She did not need to. The flowers had already told her someone had arrived. The old woman raised a hand, not in greeting, not in surprise, but in permission. The traveler stepped through the arch, and the moment their foot touched the mossy ground beyond, a hush fell deeper into the space between seconds. The garden leaned in. The bench sat beneath a flowering tree with silver-veined leaves and blossoms that opened only when spoken to. One or two turned as the visitor approached, half curious, half drowsy. "Sit," said the old woman, her voice as smooth as the back of a watch. The traveler obeyed, without fear. From somewhere nearby, a kettle sang, not loudly, not boiling, but whispering. Two cups appeared on a low stone, each filled with something warm and faintly blue, like tea brewed from twilight. "You've come during the hour of petals," she said, stirring her cup with a spoon carved from bone and bloom. The traveler said nothing. But their eyes asked. She smiled. It's when the flowers speak in color instead of scent. When they open for stories, not bees. The garden rustled in agreement. A cluster of ivory blossoms unfurled beside the bench, revealing inside their cups tiny flickers of light, memories, perhaps, or quiet thoughts from long ago. The old woman plucked one gently and placed it on the traveler's knee. "It'll open for you when you're ready." The traveler did not ask what it meant. They simply waited. And the petals listened. The blossom on the traveler's knee was still. Its edges curled like parchment. Its heart glowed faintly, pale gold, pulsing with the rhythm of thought, not blood. The traveler reached out, slow, unsure, and touched the petal's edge. At once, the garden grew quieter. Not silent, just still in a different way. As though every leaf and root leaned closer, watching, holding its breath. And the flower opened. Not with speed, not with drama. Just gently, like a door in a forgotten house swinging wide after many seasons. Within its center was not a seed, but a moment. A child's laugh, caught beneath a lemon tree. A rainstorm on a red-tiled roof. A sigh into a cup of tea that no one drank. The traveler blinked, once. Then again. But the moment did not vanish. It hovered, soft as dust in golden light. The old woman sipped her twilight tea and spoke without turning. "Their memories the world dropped," she said. "Left behind like scarves in spring." The traveler looked at the flower again. The memory had changed. Now it was a small boat on a quiet lake. Someone was singing. The tune was familiar, though no voice could be heard. The traveler looked up. "Why do they grow here?" they asked at last. The old woman's smile deepened, like a line on an old map. "Because time forgets nothing. It simply lets go." The sundial in the center of the garden had no gnomon, no pointed stick to cast a shadow. And yet, it turned. Not quickly. Not predictably. Its face was smooth as river stone, and its markings were not numbers, but symbols, spirals, feathers, waves, and one that looked like a sleeping eye. The traveler wandered toward it as though drawn, not by curiosity, but by something gentler. A sense of familiarity, maybe. Of a story they almost remembered. The dial's shadow drifted slowly, not cast by sun or moon, but by something more inward. As they neared, it paused, just briefly, over the symbol of the feather. The traveler tilted their head. From a nearby patch of marigold-colored clover, a breeze lifted, though no wind stirred the trees. The old woman remained on the bench, watching through eyes half closed. "The dial doesn't measure time," she murmured. "It listens to it." The traveler stood before it in silence. And slowly, beneath their gaze, the shadow moved again, this time resting over the symbol of the wave. A faint sound rose from somewhere in the grass. The sound of water lapping. Of something returning. The traveler closed their eyes. And in that quiet space, they heard it. A voice. Their own. From a time before words. Calling something home. The garden had hours no clock could hold. There was the hour of petals, the hour of breaths, the hour when shadows curled the other way. And now, the hour between thoughts had arrived. The traveler felt it not as a change in light, but in weight. Everything seemed softer. The grass beneath their feet did not press back. The air between their fingers held a slow warmth, as if even time had sunk into a nap. Birdsong faded, not into silence, but into something like pause. Like the garden itself had decided to blink. And in that blink, a path opened. It had not been there before. It did not wind, or lead anywhere visible. But it was lined with tiny blooms, each a different color, each glowing with a memory the traveler could not quite name. They stepped forward. Each step was like a deep breath. Not just of air, but of something else. Understanding, maybe. Or remembering without knowing why. The path curved, not sharply, but like a river dreaming of where it had been. And at the end of it stood something unexpected. A door. Just a door. Standing in the garden. Unattached. Open. Waiting. The traveler paused before the door. It was carved from wood so pale it looked like light itself. Along its edges ran delicate inlays of pressed moss and dried fern, living still, though silent. It did not lead into anything. On the other side was the garden, just the same. And yet, the traveler felt that crossing it would be a kind of change. Not in place, but in knowing. The old woman had not followed. She remained somewhere far behind, where the arch of roses bowed their heads in quiet thought. The traveler looked at the frame. There were no hinges. No knob. Only the gentle outline of a threshold, drawn not in ink, but in stillness. They stepped through. And everything paused. The world did not stop. But it became simpler. Clearer. The sound of the garden faded. And in its place came a single tone, low, warm, endless. Not music. Not voice. But something that had waited to be heard. A thought, perhaps. Their own. Before it had words. It curled gently around the heart, and whispered. Time is not a line. It is a circle that breathes. On the other side of the door, the world felt rounder. Not just in shape, but in feeling. The air curved. The light curved. Even the silence moved in loops, like a lullaby that had forgotten its beginning and didn't need an end. The traveler walked, though they were not sure where their feet led them. The garden was still around them, but softer now, less a place, more a rhythm. And in the center of it all, a clearing. Perfectly round. Circled by 12 stone seats, all low to the ground, half covered in moss and thyme. In the middle stood a tree, tall, silver-barked, its roots curled like fingers in sleep. The traveler stepped into the circle. And the tree opened its leaves. Each leaf shimmered as it turned, gold on one side, deep green on the other. They did not fall. They revealed. Each leaf showed a moment, not just from one life, but from many. A letter never sent. A song hummed beneath a breath. A kindness done without being seen. A sorrow softened by time until it turned to light. The traveler stood very still. And the tree breathed. Its breath did not move the air, but the soul. Slowly, the traveler moved to the first stone seat. It was warm. Not from sun, but from presence. They sat, and the garden around them flickered, just briefly. Not with light, but with meaning. A voice spoke, not aloud, but within. Not words exactly, but something felt. This is the seat of first knowing. The traveler nodded, though they didn't fully understand. They stood, moved to the second. This one was cooler, lined with tiny white flowers growing from its cracks. The seat of listening without reply. They moved to the third, rougher, with bits of bark and feather nestled in the moss. The seat of waiting. Each stone offered something not to learn, but to feel. To remember. To rest inside. The fourth hummed gently. The fifth was silent. The sixth made the traveler smile without knowing why. At the seventh, they wept. Not loudly, not even sadly. Just a few quiet tears, like the body sighing from within. They did not rush. They did not speak. And the garden did not watch. It simply held. 12 seats. 12 hushes. And at the end of them all, the clockmaker herself. Standing once more, her hands folded gently, her cane leaning against a tree that hadn't been there a moment before. She nodded. And the traveler understood. The garden had never been a place. It had always been, a remembering. The clockmaker stepped forward, neither smiling nor solemn. Her eyes, copper bright, reflected every hour the traveler had walked. Not just in the garden, but before. She did not speak. She only extended her hand, palm upward, weathered and warm. And in her hand was a seed. Small. Round. Faintly glowing with the same light that shimmered in the petals, in the sundial, in the tree. The traveler took it. The moment their fingers closed around the seed, the world shifted, not sharply, not suddenly, but like a wave sighing back into sea. The seats faded. The clearing softened. The leaves folded once more, closing their memories with quiet grace. And the traveler stood again at the heart of the garden, beside the arch of rose vines. The old woman was gone. Or perhaps, not gone, just folded gently back into the roots and stone and time. The sundial no longer turned. It no longer needed to. The traveler looked at the seed in their hand, and without thinking, placed it gently into the soil. A tiny sprout bloomed, at once. A new clock. A new memory. And the garden exhaled. The traveler left the garden just as the first star blinked open in the early sky. The willow bowed once more as they passed. The door in the ivy vanished behind them. But something remained. Not in their pocket. Not in their hand. But in the way they walked. In the way they listened to silence. In the way they paused when no one else did. Wherever they went, things slowed, just a little. Not to a stop, but to a hush. A petal might open unexpectedly on a windowsill. A kettle might sing without boiling. A passerby might smile for no reason at all. The garden had not stayed behind. It had simply moved, inside them. And as they walked on, through fields, through rain, through time, the traveler felt it. A faint ticking. Not from a clock, but from a seed that knew how to grow in stillness. Beyond the edge of any map lies a meadow where the sun never moves and clocks fall silent, and one wanderer, weary of the world, steps into a stillness that remembers everything he thought he had lost. There exists, in a quiet crease of the world, a meadow untouched by calendars, clocks, or the hurried hearts of men. It lies hidden beyond the edges of maps, behind the hills that fold like sleepy hands beneath a sky that never quite chooses morning or night. The path to it is not paved, nor even marked. It simply begins, when the soul begins to listen. To find the meadow, one must first walk without asking where. Past the stone bridge with its lichen-smudged smile, beyond the hush of the last turning oak, and into a mist so fine it carries the scent of forgotten lullabies. There, the world softens. The grass grows long and tangled, thick with white flowers that bloom only for those who've stopped counting steps. The air is warm, but never heavy, and carries no time in its folds, only a stillness that breathes. Birds do not sing here. They hum, soft, wordless tones that rise and fall like a memory half remembered. The sky holds a golden glow, not of dawn or dusk, but something in between. Shadows are lazy and long, but never grow. The sun hovers just above the hills, unmoving, yet always gentle. Time, in this meadow, does not tick. It drifts. It curls in corners and pools beneath wild hedges. It loops like the trails of bees too content to hurry. The wind here moves slowly, as if savoring its own passing. Leaves fall, not when they must, but when they choose. No one owns the meadow. It belongs to no village, no lord, no name. It simply is. A place outside the rhythm of the world. A pocket of pause, sewn into the fabric of forever. And every so often, only once in a long while, someone finds it. Not because they sought it, but because they needed it. Not because he floated, no, he was flesh and earth and soft muscle, like all wanderers are, but because the meadow silenced even sound. He arrived on the hush of a wind that had carried no name, his coat dusted with petals that had fallen from trees he no longer remembered. His boots, laced but weathered, whispered against the moss. His eyes were not tired, but they had been open too long. And his hands hung loose at his sides, fingers curled just slightly, as if they had only recently stopped holding something they weren't sure they should let go. He didn't know how he'd come to the meadow. Not truly. He remembered walking. Yes. Through fields that blinked with fireflies, along fences that leaned like tired thoughts, past rivers that spoke too softly for sense. But none of it had pointed to this. Still, the moment he stepped beyond the hedgerow and into the velvet sprawl of that green, golden quiet, he knew. The meadow did not greet him. It didn't have to. It simply accepted him, the way dreams do when they slip around a sleeper's shoulders. He paused at the center, where the earth made a slight bowl, as if someone long ago had scooped it gently with their palms. He sank into the grass, not to sit, but to fold. The white flowers leaned toward him. The wind kissed his cheeks like an old friend. Time loosened its grip on him, thread by invisible thread. He breathed. Not to keep going, but because it felt good. And the meadow breathed back. Not far from where the man rested, something stirred in the tall grass. Not a sound, exactly, more a shifting, the faint brushing of petal against petal. He did not turn to look, not at first. The meadow asked for stillness, and he honored it. But the stirring came again, slow, deliberate, like a breath taken by something old. When he did lift his head, his eyes fell upon a curious shape rising just beyond the clover line. It looked, at first, like a mound of stones, but then it moved, and the light caught the edge of what appeared to be feathers. Not bright ones, no, they were soft, like fallen leaves, pale green, silvered with dusk, speckled in a pattern that the eye couldn't quite follow. The creature, if it could be called such, stood no taller than the man's knee. It had no face that could be named, no eyes that glinted. Instead, it held presence, steady, calm, and watchful, like the pause between a question and its answer. It tilted slightly, as if to better see the man, though it had no visible features. Around it, the grass bent slightly inward, as though cradling it. He did not speak. Somehow, words felt too sharp. He simply offered his stillness. A kind of quiet greeting. The creature, if it felt anything, responded in kind. It nestled into the moss, and together they sat, two shapes caught in a moment that knew no beginning or end. It was then he noticed, the longer he sat, the more full he felt. Not heavy, no. Full like a bell before it rings. Full like the pause before rain. Full like silence, just before the first note. And the meadow, watching from every leaf and stem, held its breath right along with them. Somewhere to the left, near a fallen tree soft with velvet moss, something shimmered, not with light, but with rhythm. The man turned his head, slowly, and saw it, a single stalk rising taller than the rest, with a bell-shaped blossom at its top. It did not sway in the wind, no, it pulsed, as if beating with a hidden heart. The blossom was translucent, delicate, like spun glass kissed by moonlight. It didn't ring, not with any noise the ears could hold, but the man heard it just the same. Deep in the chest, low in the bones, it sang a sound that wrapped around him like an old memory. He stood. Not quickly. Not with purpose. But gently, drawn forward by a sense that the meadow had opened this path just for him. As he approached, the stalk leaned slightly, the bellflower dipping toward him. It glowed from within, a soft, amber light that pulsed in time with the hush. He reached out, not to touch, but to feel. And as his hand neared, the light grew warmer. A vision bloomed, not in front of him, but inside. A child's hand, cradling a pebble. The smell of smoke on cold air. A ripple of laughter, low and distant, as though echoing across the folds of time. Tears, not sad. Just, old. The bell did not chime, and yet it spoke. And its message was simple. Not all things lost are gone. Not all silence is empty. The words weren't words, not really. They arrived as knowing, as comfort, as permission. He let the vision go. The flower returned to stillness. The man breathed out. And in the hush that followed, the meadow shifted, not around him, but within. Something had opened. And it would not close again. The man wandered now, not with purpose, but with a kind of trusting drift. The meadow had no paths, and yet it guided him. Flowers bowed as he passed, and tufts of grass leaned in strange, rhythmic waves, as if listening to something just beneath the soil. He followed a trail of rust-colored moths. Slow, wide-winged, they floated in spirals ahead of him, never rushing, never rising far. They shimmered faintly with dust like powdered amber, and with each beat of their wings, the man felt the air grow thicker, not heavy, but suspended, like honey in late light. They led him toward a fern-ringed hollow, a small dip in the land where moss glowed faintly green and something hummed, not loud, not sharp, but steady. A hum without sound. A rhythm without beat. He knelt, brushed aside a fan of fern, and there beneath the fronds he saw it. A clock. Or something shaped like one. It lay nestled into the earth, half sunken, cradled by roots and stone. Its face was made not of glass, but of something living, veins like leaves ran across it. The hands did not move in circles, but in gentle spirals, like water stirred by a fingertip. Around its edge, instead of numbers, tiny carvings, a feather, a sleeping fox, a closed eye, a single curled leaf. He did not touch it. He only listened. And in that quiet listening, he felt the time it held. Not hours. Not minutes. Not anything that ticked. This clock measured things the world had forgotten how to name. A breath held too long. A kindness never spoken. The moment just before choosing. And the one just after. It ticked without ticking. And in its still rhythm, he felt himself begin to remember something he had never said aloud. He sat by the fern-ringed hollow for what might have been a moment, or a morning, or a month, no way to know, and no need to ask. The clock beneath the fern spun on, tracing gentle spirals that made sense not to the mind, but to the soul. Above him, the sky had not changed. Still golden, still soft, like brushed velvet against the senses. The moths had vanished into the hush. All was still. And then, a sound. No, not a sound, but the shape of one. A rustle, low and silken, like fabric falling through water. He turned his head and saw a bloom rising from the moss, slow, elegant, as if time itself were leaning in to whisper something secret. The flower was wide and pale blue, petals thick as parchment and lined with silver. It did not open all at once, but layer by layer, unfolding with the gravity of a dream. At its center, a soft glow, dimmer than flame, brighter than moonlight. And within that glow, an image. He saw himself. But younger. Walking beside a small figure, someone who laughed without fear, whose hand he held lightly, reverently. A path stretched out behind them, lined with crows and crooked trees. He saw a scarf trailing in the wind, a book clutched under one arm, and the way his past self paused, turned to listen, to something only the child had heard. He had forgotten this. Or perhaps, he had buried it. Deep beneath grown-up footsteps and folded maps. The flower pulsed. Not with sadness. With remembrance. A message bloomed in his chest. What you've lost is not gone. It waits in places where clocks no longer chase it. He closed his eyes, not to shut the vision away, but to let it settle. Like rain soaking into roots. And when he opened them again, the bloom had folded back into the moss. But the memory remained. Beyond the hollow where the clock nestled into sleep, the land curved upward, gentle as a cradle. The man climbed without haste, the grass brushing his calves, warm and fragrant with crushed mint and wild thyme. The sky, unchanged, glowed softly above him, forever late afternoon, forever the golden hour that never darkened, never advanced. At the hill's crest stood a tree. Or, something like one. It was tall, certainly. Its trunk wide enough that 5 men with joined hands could not encircle it. But it was unlike any tree he had known. Its bark was white, not bleached or sun-dried, but alive, almost luminous. Smooth as bone, cool even in the warmth. No cracks, no scars, no rings. And it had no leaves. No branches stretched to the sky. Instead, the trunk split into 1,000 filaments, each like a pale ribbon of silk, rising into the air and hanging there, motionless, like the strings of a harp that had long since forgotten its song. At its base were roots, hundreds of them, thin and woven tight, spiraling outward into the meadow as if reaching not for water, but memory. The man stepped forward and placed his hand upon the bark. The world held its breath. His mind filled not with sound, not with vision, but with presence, an awareness vast and slow, old and gentle. It did not speak in words. It hummed in thoughts that had no edge. It felt. I do not grow, it whispered, though no voice stirred. I remember. Images drifted into him, an old woman pressing seeds into the soil, a child asleep beside a lamb, a kiss shared beneath a thunderstorm, a single tear falling into a teacup. Each a moment the world had no space for. Each a story held here, rooted, waiting. The tree was not young. But neither was it ancient. It had simply always been here. For those who stayed long enough to listen. At the base of the white tree, nestled between 2 of its spiral roots, something gleamed. He knelt, brushing aside soft moss and fallen petals, and uncovered an object, slender, delicate, and perfectly still. An hourglass. Not made of glass or sand. Its frame was carved from driftwood, smooth and salt-worn, and the sand within was a shimmer of golden dust, suspended in place. It did not fall. It did not move. It glowed faintly, as if caught in a thought that had yet to be finished. He lifted it gently. The moment his fingers closed around its frame, a deep, warm hush filled the space around him. The breeze halted. Even the breath of the meadow paused. Inside his chest, he felt the shape of something, an ache. No. A longing. The hourglass, too, remembered. It held not the measure of time, but the weight of it, the choices unmade, the words unsaid, the long silences between moments. It pulsed with quiet wisdom, a message folding itself softly around his thoughts. Not everything must pass. Some things wait. Some things return. He stood, the hourglass in hand, and turned once toward the white tree. It shimmered, not in farewell, but in quiet blessing. The filaments above him quivered once, faint as a breath through silk. And then the wind returned, soft, stirred, and urged him forward. The meadow had more to show him. And time, for once, was in no hurry. Beyond the tree, the land sloped gently downward into a hollow cradled by wild hedges. The grass here was even softer, thick and cool beneath the feet, laced with tiny blue flowers that blinked open as he passed, as if recognizing an old friend. At the bottom of the slope was a pool. Round, still, unclouded. It held no ripples. No insects danced on its surface. Even the wind seemed to tiptoe around its edge. The man approached slowly, holding the hourglass in both hands. He paused at the water's edge and looked down, expecting, perhaps, his own reflection. But the water showed him something else. Not a face, not a form, but moments. First, a windowpane traced with frost, a child's finger etching loops into the ice. Then, a candle left burning in a room that no longer held anyone to warm. Then, a pair of hands holding a small, broken compass, the needle spinning gently as though uncertain of where it had once belonged. None of these things belonged to him, or did they? He saw them not with his eyes, but with something deeper. A knowing. The water stirred, faintly. Not from his breath, not from breeze, but from memory. He knelt and dipped his fingers into the pool. It was not cold. Not warm. It simply was, the way truth is, when one no longer tries to explain it. And then, floating to the surface, came an image so familiar it stilled his breath. A hand reaching for his. Small. Trusting. Once held, and then, let go. Tears came. Not in sorrow, but as release. The hourglass pulsed gently in his hands. And the pool, in its infinite stillness, held that moment for him, without judgment, without end. He rose slowly from the mirror pool, the water drying from his fingertips before it could fall. The weight in his chest was lighter now, not gone, but changed. Carried. Accepted. The sky above had not shifted, but the light seemed to hold more color, gold-threaded with lavender, a deeper blue at the edges, like the softest twilight. The hourglass no longer glowed as brightly, it had settled into itself, as if its message had been given. As he walked on, his steps carried purpose, not hurried, but certain, like roots reaching gently downward, deeper into what was already known. He came upon a clearing encircled by ancient stones, each smooth and low, as if placed there by hands long since vanished. At the center stood one stone alone, flat, wide, worn down by wind and time, but still strong. It was not carved. No symbols marked its face. And yet, he knew what it was. A place to leave something behind. He knelt. Placed the hourglass atop the stone. Watched as it pulsed once more, softly, then dimmed. The dust within it began to fall, slow, deliberate, silent. Not hurried. Not trapped. Simply, ready. And the stone accepted it. There was no sound. No light. Just a deep and quiet settling. As if the meadow, too, had exhaled. He stood. And in that moment, the hush around him folded close, like a cloak of peace. The journey was not over. But a chapter had ended. And the meadow had held it gently. The man stood a long while before the stone, watching the hourglass settle into stillness. No wind stirred now, and the meadow waited, not expectant, not demanding. Only present. The quiet that held him was the kind that comes at the end of a long song, the final note still humming in the bones. He turned, not because he knew where to go, but because something in the air had shifted. A beckoning. Not a pull, but a nudge. The grass beneath his feet felt warmer now, like sun caught in memory. He walked, one step at a time, each one lighter than the last. He passed once more through the places he'd wandered, the fern-ringed clock, the pale white tree, the mirror pool, now still as glass and glowing faintly blue. They did not fade as he passed. They watched, gently. As if to say, we remember you, even when you forget yourself. The moths returned, one by one, gliding ahead, and a narrow path began to form, not paved, not marked, but real. Flowers bowed to either side. The light slanted just slightly, casting soft shadows that moved, not with the sun, but with his breath. And up ahead, mist. The same soft silver veil he had passed through when he'd first arrived. He paused before it. Behind him, the meadow held its hush, its unmeasured, undemanding embrace. Before him, the mist shimmered like a question only the heart could answer. And he stepped through. The air on the other side was cooler. Sharper. Edged with time. He emerged not with a jolt, but with a soft rejoining, like a hand slipping gently back into a familiar glove. Birds chirped now, clearly. The sky was blue, and the sun sat at a proper height, measuring its light with ordinary care. The world had returned. But he had not quite returned the same. He looked at his hands, empty now. Yet they trembled faintly with something held, something kept. He turned once, expecting the meadow to be there behind him. But there was only a narrow hedgerow, a willow's bent bough, and a stone path that wound toward a village far away. No white tree. No bellflower. No clock beneath ferns. And yet, when he closed his eyes, he felt the rhythm of the place still beating softly behind his ribs. The hush of the meadow had followed him, not in sound, not in sight, but in the shape of his breath, the slowness of his steps, the quiet between his thoughts. He walked on. Not back to anything, but forward. Gently. Knowing now what the clocks had forgotten. That some places are not measured by time, but by presence. And that sometimes, to remember who we are, we must first forget the ticking world entirely. And so, the man returned to his life. But the meadow walked with him, always. Soft beneath the surface. And never in a hurry.